So 2023 is about to be over, or already over. I'm not sure exactly when this video is coming out. But I saw quite a few movies this year, so much so that unfortunately I couldn't dedicate a specific video to all the films that deserved it, or even to the ones that didn't. So I figured what better to do than recap everything I saw that was released this year, or at the very least, everything I can remember. And don't worry, this list is in absolutely no particular order, but I will give my best and worst films of the year respectively at the end, so stay tuned for that. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to let me know your favorite and least favorite movies down in the comments below. And now, with all that out of the way, let's finally get into this. The Marvels obviously wasn't great, but I did think it had some fun chemistry between the leads and some decent action set pieces, which I know doesn't sound like much, but I genuinely do think it was better than about half the other superhero movies to come out this year, so, I mean, take that how you will. My main beef with Leo is that something about this damn lizard just kinda creeped me out. He's like some sort of weird psychiatrist or something for these terribly animated kids, and I was really not vibing with the story they were going for most of this movie. The musical components are also terrible and pointless, but I can safely say that the one plus this movie does have is the humor, because it is surprisingly pretty raunchy and funny for a bad animated Netflix film. Totally Killer was pretty much just a snooze fest here. The main actress was fun, but outside of that it was about as bland as a PG-13 slasher movie could be. It also had maybe the worst design I've ever seen for a slasher killer. If you haven't seen this moron, please look it up. It's way more hilarious than anything that actually happens in the movie. Every scene in the movie with Dracula and Renfield is actually a lot of fun and involves some really sick sets, effects, and gore. But unfortunately, that's only about half the movie, and the other half is boring, uninteresting scenes with Awkwafina and Sonic that I could care less about. I'm not a big rom-com guy, so I'm not really sure why I watched No Hard Feelings to begin with. But even with my preconceived bias, I still had some fun here. Even with as predictable as the story was, there's enough heart and humor to carry the film for me. Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves was fan-fucking-tastic. The first true great movie of this list. I can't put into words how much fun I had with this film, and just how great it felt finally seeing a larger-than-life fantasy epic on the big screen, after what's felt like years. If you were put off from watching this because you thought it looked stupid or too nerdy, give it a chance. And please, Paramount, give us a sequel. I enjoyed The Killer quite a bit for what it was, but it is definitely not a movie I'd willingly return to for any particular reason. I don't even think it's Michael Fassbender's best role of the year. But this movie totally bombed and was ripped apart by critics, but I gotta say, outside of a few cheesy moments, some underdeveloped characters, and a fairly predictable story, this was pretty great. Fassbender's stupid-ass speeches had me laughing out loud at multiple points throughout the film, and the over-the-top silliness brought to the culture and people of American Samoa didn't feel ill-intended or mean-spirited like I've seen some people say. It was more of an embrace of the fun and heartfelt culture that I could feel oozing out of Taika Waititi's filmmaking here. I don't know, I'm definitely in the minority, because I know there are people who for some reason hate this movie, but I thought it was a super fun time and I will definitely be watching again. Cocaine Bear peaks at the park ranger ambulance scene in the middle and never manages to top that absurd hyperbolic energy I was hoping for with a movie called Cocaine Bear. I'd say it's still worth watching for that scene alone among a few other pretty fun and exciting moments, but I have to say I was hoping for just a tiny bit more with this one. Dial of Destiny was easily my most anticipated movie of the entire year, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't mildly disappointed. It's not a terrible movie, even though I do think it's the worst out of the franchise, but it is definitely not the ending I was hoping for when it comes to one of my favorite characters in the history of fiction. I think I'll make a video on the Indiana Jones series soon, so I'll save my more in-depth thoughts for that, but from where it stands, yeah, it was just okay. I'm not going to talk about Horror in the High Desert 2 very much, because I also want to make a video on this series once it wraps up, but I will just say that director Dutch Marik, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, has begun one of the most promising indie horror franchises I have ever been fortunate enough to witness, and I cannot wait for more. I'm a sucker for all these product biopics that have been coming out recently, and with Air surprisingly being the only one that I saw this year, I'm almost ashamed to admit I kinda loved it. Alright, this is gonna be a long one. So I did really like John Wick 4. I'd go as far as to say that it was almost perfect. For those of you that haven't seen the film, it is essentially just around 20 action scenes back to back for 3 hours. And while on paper that sounds cool, and in execution I have to admit it was even cooler, I couldn't help but feel this one drag on way longer than I would have liked. While yes, each action scene is great for their own unique reasons, especially the top-down third-person section, which was one of the most fun movie moments on this whole list, every other part of this movie goes on for just slightly too long. They're cool for the first 5 minutes, don't get me wrong, but the scene isn't over for 10. That's what the entire movie felt like to me. It sounds insane to say that there was too much action in a John Wick movie, especially when it was all so entertaining and unique, but I couldn't help but feel these fun moments just start washing over me after a certain point. The director of Flora and Son, John Carney, made one of my favorite movies of the last decade with Sing Street, so I was eagerly awaiting his next film. And while it didn't live up to the same heights as Sing Street, Flora and Son is definitely still a wholesome and enjoyable time overall. For me, it was just a little too cheesy and also had some pretty bad musical numbers as well, which kept it from being in the top tier. I was hoping we'd get an over-the-top insane sloth horror movie with Slaughterhouse, but it was only when I got about 15 minutes into the film that I realized it was rated PG-13 and wasn't really a horror movie at all. However, I can safely say, as someone who spent most of his youth and teenage life watching every bad creature feature ever made, this one at least has some personality behind it, and isn't nearly as painful as the standard cookie-cutter slop your dollar bin sci-fi originals got. I didn't really like Mario, to be honest. I liked the animation, and the story, and even the voice acting, but at the end of the day, the movie just wasn't funny. The few jokes they do pull wouldn't even be funny to the child demographic this movie was aimed at, I feel like. I appreciate how brisk and fast-paced the film is, and I am looking forward to any future installments, but I was definitely a little let down with this one. I'm not gonna lie, everything I just said about Mario applies to Chicken Run 2, only Chicken Run does it all slightly better. Sisu was a blast to watch in theaters, and easily one of the highlights of the year. It's a real shame it wasn't bigger than it was. Easily the best R-rated action film on the list. Sorry, John Wick. I thought No One Will Save You was a great, eerie, creepy little alien flick for the first 2/3 of the runtime. Then it tries to do a lot more and go places it really didn't need to, which sort of soured the experience a little bit by the end. But those first 2/3 still shine through hard.
Lobster gang. I've been forever, yeah. Don't make business with my place that they don't love me, I don't care. They say Larry, you and also how therefore you will get yours well.
I had no expectations going into Nimona, but I can safely say that it was a pretty fun time and had some great compelling characters and action. The two leads have fantastic chemistry, and I'd be very interested in a sequel to continue their relationship into the future. Just like Leo though, Netflix really needs to get their animation in check, because this was pretty hideous to look at. Definitely not a perfect movie by any means, but Thanksgiving doesn't take itself seriously enough for that to be an issue. And with some great gore and a fun new slasher killer at play here, this is easily a horror franchise that I could not be more excited for. Bottoms was a whole lot dumber than I was expecting, but I truly do mean that in the best way possible. I'll be completely honest here, I am nowhere near the biggest Christopher Nolan fan out there, but I couldn't help but be fascinated about the concept of him doing a Robert Oppenheimer biopic, and I have to say, it was very solid. Not great, I think the movie moves at a slower pace than I was hoping for, and the overwhelming abundance of characters were difficult to keep track of, but the performances and cinematography do wonders at keeping you engaged and glued to the screen for that massive runtime. Guy Ritchie's without a doubt one of my favorite directors working today, but when I first heard about and saw the trailers for The Covenant, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. These long, overly dramatic war movies are some of my least favorite films to watch, period. But because I love the guy's other work so much, I eventually decided I'd give it a shot, and oh boy was I wrong. They did him dirty with the marketing, because The Covenant is genuinely amazing. The last chunk of the movie admittedly slows down quite a bit and becomes a little repetitive, but even including that, this movie rocks. Exciting action, a great sense of chemistry between the actors, and an insane true story behind it. I highly recommend this one for anyone that hasn't seen it. I think I kinda loved this one. Leave the World Behind keeps you guessing, and it's got a just addicting energy to the whole thing that keeps you hyped up even though the movie isn't afraid to have its slower moments. The ending does kinda come at a time where I felt like there was about 15 more minutes of story left to tell, so hopefully we get some sort of continuation for this. But even without one, I had a blast. Across the Spider-Verse. It's really fucking good. I don't know what you expected from me, but yeah, obviously it's great. I do like the first one better though. I had a very thought-provoking and creative experience with Poor Things, but I feel like its message is so predictable, and somehow with a movie this weird and exaggerated, I was slightly more disinterested in it than I would have expected. Still pretty good, don't get me wrong, but not nearly as great as it was made out to be. The Last Voyage of the Demeter had a really solid first 45 minutes, but after the Dracula stuff gets going, the movie just doesn't know what the hell to do. It's very repetitive and honestly a little boring. It's a shame too, because just based on this premise alone, the film could have been incredible. I've never been a big video game guy, but Mortal Kombat was that one franchise that slipped through the cracks, and now I found myself ingesting every bit of the franchise I can. And thankfully for me, this new slew of animated movies they've been releasing the last few years have been exactly what I wanted on the movie side of the property. And Mortal Kombat Legends Cage Match keeps that winning streak going. There's no reason the Evil Dead movies still need to be going this hard, but I am not complaining. I love a fun horror movie, and Evil Dead Rise delivers on the horror and the fun for the entire runtime. It's also got the sickest title drop I think I might have ever seen. I like Shazam 2 a lot more than I think most other people did. The first one is still a better movie for sure, but there's more than enough good stuff here that I can confidently say I'm upset we won't be getting a third movie to round out the trilogy. I don't think I really understood everything Wes Anderson was trying to do with Asteroid City, but even then it's a hilarious film that might just be Wes's best from a solely visual level. The only note I wrote down for The Flash was soulless, and I think that sums up my thoughts pretty well on the whole thing. May December was one of those movies that just works on all levels. The insanely dark premise told through the eyes of something as ridiculous as a method actor getting inspiration is such a good idea for this tragic of a story. But the real kicker here are the performances, which carry this movie to being one of the best of the entire year. I wrote Talk to Me off at first because I thought it was just going to be another lame YouTuber movie with a boring cookie cutter premise, but thankfully I gave it a chance. And yeah, it's genuinely just a tight, fast-paced, fun little horror movie. I got no complaints. I thought Barbie was pretty good. More than anything, it's just an appealing movie to look at, with all the fun colors and sets. Throw in 2 great lead performances and you have what is probably the best case scenario for a movie about fucking Barbies of all things. With such an insane and inventive premise, it was almost impossible for Infinity Pool to live up to everything it could have offered. But thankfully, I think it delivered all it could have and more. It's such an inventive film that when you dig deeper and learn more about the director and the themes he was trying to tackle with the film, you walk away having appreciated so much more from it. Extremely obvious twist aside, Saltburn was pure entertainment that I do think, even with how weird and dark a lot of it is, can and probably will reach a much larger audience than I think people would give it credit for. It also really goes on to strengthen my opinion that Barry Keoghan is going to be one of the greatest actors of this generation soon, if he isn't already. The biggest case of wasted potential here. 65 has most likely just ruined any chance we've got of seeing an original dinosaur property on the big screen for the next decade. It's really not even like a watchable movie. All signs were pointing to this being a sleeper hit that could have really shaken things up in the extinct world of dinosaur cinema, but unfortunately it seems like the complete opposite has happened. I didn't really like Five Nights at Freddy's. I wouldn't call it terrible, just kind of boring and uninspired. From a franchise with so much lore and untapped cinematic potential, for this to be the final result after however long fans have been waiting is pretty sad, honestly. Ant-Man Quantumania was my least favorite superhero movie of the year, I think. Took a super likable cast of characters that should be fun in any scenario and decided to set them in a bland gray void for the entire movie, in an experience I could only describe as washing over you by the end. At least The Flash was trying to do something. This was just dull. I didn't really get the hype with Saw X, man. The actual Saw traps and gore and all that stuff is good and fun, which is why I still think this was decent, since at the end of the day, that's pretty much what I'm here for. But any scene with Jigsaw as a civilian was cheesy, and they for some reason try to paint this terrible psychopath as an empathetic and misunderstood good guy, which I thought was completely pointless given the fact that we know who this dude is after all. The plot as a whole, while I do respect it for trying something new, it felt like a Family Guy cutaway or something, man. I don't even know. It's not even a horrendous movie or anything. I don't know why I'm ripping into this one so hard, but for some reason I've seen all the Saw movies, and I can safely say now, after 10 installments, these might just not be my thing. Just like with Saw, Transformers Rise of the Beasts made me realize that maybe I just don't like Transformers. This was so close to being my worst movie of the year that I honestly don't even want to talk about it right now. I know the general consensus for this film was that it was one of the better ones in the franchise, but I actually think it was one of the worst. I really thought that after Bumblebee, maybe this series could turn itself around and become something great finally, but boy, was I way off. Cobweb was a super fun throwback to 80s horror and really came through with those nostalgic, cheesy vibes that I was hoping for. It's not gonna blow your mind or anything, but it's a perfect movie to throw on during Halloween. Good Boy was not very scary, but there are definitely quite a few creepy moments, some great performances, and a few fantastic twists that carry this movie from just being another pretentious, elevated horror dud. Operation Fortune Ruse de Guerre, if that's how you pronounce it, was one of the first movies I saw this year, and honestly was one of the most fun. Another check on Guy Ritchie's chart if you ask me. But out of the 4 total films this year, it's insane that Jason Statham only had one good one. And it was this of all things. It's a Wonderful Knife was like if Totally Killer was actually decent. It's honestly just worth watching to see Justin Long play a live-action Aloysius O'Hare. I can't do Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 justice in the amount of time that I have here. James Gunn proved himself as one of the greatest blockbuster directors of all time, and all around just wrapped a neat little bow on the rare, perfect trilogy. I don't want to jump on the MCU hate bandwagon, but it is going to be a miracle for them to pull something off that's as incredible as this anytime soon. It's not even fair to compare Godzilla Minus One with any of the other kaiju flicks that are coming out today. The best comparison I have for it is Jaws of all things. I'm not saying it's as good as Jaws, I'm not crazy, but that middle climax with Godzilla destroying the city is hands down my favorite scene of the entire year. I do think that the movie slows down a little too much for me after this moment, but still I'd be insane to call this anything other than the greatest kaiju movie of all time. Where Evil Lurks was my favorite horror movie of the year, and it had some pretty good competition. Usually horror of this nature does nothing for me. Possession and ghost movies are not my thing at all. But Where Evil Lurks is so fucking disturbing and haunting that I can't help but be terrified by almost every scene in the film. It's such a good execution of its premise and has the most detailed and lived-in feeling world I might have ever seen in a horror movie. It almost felt more like a terrifying modern-day fantasy than it did a horror film. Absolutely not for the faint of heart. But if you want to become uneasy around your own dog, this is the movie for you. I don't know how much flack I'm gonna get for this, but I liked Mutant Mayhem more than Spider-Verse, and it was easily my second favorite movie of the year. If nothing else, 2023 really showed me how much I appreciate a short, simple movie. And Mutant Mayhem is all killer, no filler, and somehow gave me an even deeper appreciation for the Ninja Turtles than I thought possible. Great animation, great voice acting, great soundtrack. This is what I was hoping Rise of the Beast was gonna be for Transformers. There was literally nothing about this movie that I did not like. There was just one other film that I liked a little bit more. But before we get into that, we have to do everyone's favorite part of the video, the worst movie of 2023. And even with such strong contenders this year, there was one movie that stood apart from the rest in just how awful it was. One film that might actually be the worst product I have ever consumed. I don't know, alright? I don't know why I watched this, much less sat through the entire thing. If I had to guess, I'd say it was because I was so utterly baffled and disgusted by what I was watching that I couldn't remove my eyes from the screen. But yeah, no, don't even bother commenting because I'm just as confused as to why this is here as you are. I don't even put movies like this on these lists because I watch so many crappy F-tier creature features and other horror junk that this list would be way too long and would just be me saying the same thing over and over for an hour. I don't know why I put myself through that, but that's just how I am. And I figured creepypasta would be the same. Some bad horror movie I watched for 30 minutes one night before falling asleep and never thinking about again. But I promise you, I could not have prepared myself for how awful the film actually was. Just the balls to make a creepypasta movie in 2023 is beyond me. This would have been a bad idea in 2008 or whenever they were a thing, but now, in the present day, I didn't even think they were cool back when they were cool. And I know most normal human beings would probably think that exact same thing. Now, the last thing I want to do is rip apart the director or the actors or really anyone involved, because I have never made a movie, and who's to say if I ever did, it would be any better than this. But as a fan of film itself, I cannot sit by and let shit like this slide. It's like the movie was scared to be scary. Even the jump scares, the easiest way to elicit some type of feeling through a horror film, all fall flat. The plot makes absolutely no sense whatsoever and genuinely pissed me off every time it cut back to it. But where are my manners? You obviously haven't seen this trash, so let me try and explain it to the best of my understanding. Creepypasta is an anthology film where our lead character Marco goes back and forth with a mysterious online entity sharing authentic internet creepypastas, which are just short form horror videos. But this dude Marco is like at the scene of a horrific crime and he slowly turns into a weird zombie freak throughout his conversation. And I don't know, man. I really didn't like this movie. The anthologies themselves are all terrible. Not one is memorable or has an interesting premise or style, which is actually absurd given that they're each like 3 minutes long and there are about 50 in the whole goddamn movie. Each one just takes place in a boring suburban house before a boring, badly edited monster shows up and kills our boring stand-in lead character for the clip. I mean, if you're gonna be repetitive, at least repeat something good. Also, isn't the whole point of a creepypasta the fact that they're on the internet and people can write whatever they want? Shouldn't this lead to unique and intriguing premises with fun monsters since there are literally no limits? No? Just a shadowy guy with red eyes again, huh? Fantastic. In a year that had some of my favorite horror movies I've seen in a long time, creepypasta is a massive blight on that trophy and leads me to understand just a little bit more why people say that horror isn't their thing. Because after watching this dumpster fire, horror might not be my thing either. Now that that's over, we can finally talk about the moment I've been waiting for. The opportunity to finally just gush about some great cinema. And this year's greatest piece of cinema was...
Enough, Reggie.
If you know anything about me, then you know that some of my favorite films of all time are when a group of dudes just hang out and go on an adventure together. But there's a really dark undertone to the whole experience. Stand By Me, The Goonies, Ghostbusters, any Tarantino movie really, Basketball Diaries, or my favorite film of all time, Trainspotting. And now a newcomer has entered that list, The Iron Claw. Based on the tragic but true story of the Von Erich wrestling family and their rise and fall through stardom, Iron Claw is filled to the brim with heart and horror, and is one of those rare films that by the end leaves you feeling both uplifted and like you just got a shotgun blasted through your soul. From a technical level, the film exceeds in practically every single way. The soundtrack to the cinematography to even what is probably the most convincing depiction of the 70s/80s I have ever seen in a movie. All of it comes together to give a memorable and authentic experience that I cannot remember the last time made me feel the way Iron Claw did. I'm not even a wrestling fan at all, but the way director Sean Durkin films the wrestling scenes gives them such a weight and a hard-hitting feel that I've never experienced from the sport before. But even putting all that aside, the thing that really made this so impactful to me were the performances. If you'd heard anything about this film, it's probably about Zac Efron's portrayal as Kevin Von Erich. And yeah, it really is that good. I've always thought Efron was a solid actor, but this is genuinely some next level shit. Plus just the physical shape his body is in shows so much commitment to the role, and adds a whole other layer onto the pressure and forceful themes that the movie is giving, with them now being reflected into the real world. There's also the other three brothers, each getting their own moment to shine here, and each delivering some of the most heartbreaking and emotional movie moments I have witnessed in a long time. Everyone in The Iron Claw, and I mean everyone, from the dad to Lily James, are such genuine and lived in performances, I honestly wouldn't even know where to start with my praise. The way the family interacts and the dynamics at play are so real, and even me, someone who never had a brother, felt like this is what me and my hypothetical brothers would behave like. The last lines with Efron and his kids had me in tears, and even with all the horror movies I watched this year, the scene with the mother watching TV and the silhouette behind her, it was easily the most haunting image I have seen throughout all of 2023. All around just a terrific movie that I cannot say one bad thing about. The Iron Claw is without a doubt my favorite film of the year.
Tag on my jeans, a polo, 3 or 4 trout popping around in the rowboat. The future is now and it's critical. Mom still tell me I look like a criminal. I keep the cap to a minimal. Crazy as fuck, but I'm also presentable. Shorty, I think that it's just us. What's up, baby? I'm not trying to fuck up. We got a good thing going on. It was 90 a quarter. We all started mowing the lawn. Where do you go? Where you gone? You ain't never made money like this playing shows in Vermont.